Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, go aloft in one of the oldest bombers in the American arsenal, the B-52 Stratofortress. Find out what it's like to ride in a high-altitude bomber. Plus, we go to the Brigade Boxing Championships at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. What's it like to get walloped in the face by a midshipman? We'll let you know. Also, the Navy launches a new rating focused on robotics, and the Marines explore some uniform updates. Those headlines and more from around the military. And finally, some of the most interesting firearms at the SHOT Show in Las Vegas. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Colin Demarest. It may surprise you to learn that the B-52 bomber, a linchpin of the U.S. aerial defense arsenal, is already decades old, with some airframes old enough to have fought in the Vietnam War. And on top of that, the plan is to keep them flying for another 20 to 30 years. So, they're getting older, but as part of a strategy to keep them fighting, the Air Force is updating the fleet with new engines and other gear. As that effort gets underway, we got a chance to fly in one of the Cold War behemoths. Join us for part 3 of our series on what's new with the B-52.
When it comes to long-range bombers, the Air Force has a pretty small menu to choose from. By the 2030s, there'll be just two: the B-21 Raider and the B-52 Stratofortress, the workhorse for all kinds of duties, from dropping conventional bombs to carrying nuclear payloads. But with just two airframes to choose from, the Air Force has to make sure both models are always flying, and will do so for the next 3 or 4 decades. To do that, it has to continually train new B-52 pilots and crews. For a look at what that's like, and what it's like to be inside one of these bombers, we recently got a ride from the 11th Bomb Squadron, part of the Air Force's B-52 Formal Training Unit. For the flight we're going on, one of the main purposes is to train new crew. So in the cockpit today is First Lieutenant Clay Hultgren, who's learning how to pilot the Stratofortress. First up, taxi and takeoff, of course. The crew of the Red Gremlin 2, as this plane is nicknamed, get the bomber lined up for departure.
You're noted. ILS runway 33 approaching you. Departing runway 33.
Alright, in the right turn, needles to right, balls to left, 1, 2, 3, increasing, turn subject spot.
Fast 5, you are clear for takeoff, change departure, see ya!
Scout 9 heavy flight, clear departure. Cleared, takeoff, switching departure, go.
Next on the list, getting into formation with a second B-52. The B-52 is a big aircraft with 8 jet engines, 10 wheels, and a 185-foot wingspan. It's one of the largest planes in the American military. What's it like to learn to fly one? Prior to the flight, we got a chance to sit down with the crew about the experience of piloting the B-52.
Pilots come mainly from the T-38 pipeline, which is a small fighter-type airplane meant to teach fighter pilots. It does provide a lot of good things that they learn, but it's not a one-for-one transition.
Yeah, I think feeling-wise, the biggest difference coming from the 38 was mainly just the whole purpose of the 38 is kind of training you for like fighters. So you're pulling a lot of G's, you're talking about, turn circles and all this stuff, versus the B-52. It doesn't do that same job, so you're not feeling a lot different in the seat, but it's a lot more task-oriented. Usually in a T-38, a lot of it is up to you, like whether there's an emergency or you're talking interplane or with an agency. A lot of that, it's like, I know it's up to me, it's my responsibility. But here in the B-52, since the responsibilities are kind of split between the crew, like you can't just do it yourself and make a split decision. You kind of have to work with the crew, which I think is probably one of the hardest things as a new pilot.
Back in flight, the next task is a delicate one: aerial refueling. A B-52 can stay aloft for 18 to 36 hours, maybe even longer if necessary, to provide the Air Force a global reach. But often, it needs a mid-air fill-up, so refueling is essential. But it's also one of the hardest flying skills to master. There's a lot of aerodynamic factors at play, so pilots must learn to delicately approach the refueling aircraft. Mistakes can mean disaster, so the officer in charge has to be ready to take the yoke. The B-52 is built to do one major thing: drop bombs. So after refueling, this bomber turned back to Fort Johnson in Louisiana for simulated bombing practice.
What might be seeing you do to the weapons release? So what you'll see is we'll be flying to a target, and then I'll be hitting this button to release. I'll be unlocking here, so I go unlock, and then I go to release the weapons. When you hear like weapons hot, that's me unlocking the weapons. It's basically taking the safety off the gun, and then this is pulling the trigger.
Finally, you've got to get your plane back on the ground. So the last piece of training for the day is landing. The U.S. Air Force is rapidly advancing. Along with all the high-tech wizardry found in the brand new B-21, it's also incorporating technology like AI, uncrewed drones, and other futuristic capabilities. But for now, it also has the old standby, the decidedly not futuristic B-52 Stratofortress. It's old, it's heavy and weathered. Instead of space-age materials and 3D screens, it's all gray steel and aging dials. But it's also tried and tested, and the Air Force is going to keep it going as long as it can, potentially edging up to that 100 years in service benchmark. Will it make it there? Time will tell. We'll be covering it along the way. For Military Times and Defense News, I'm Stephen Losey.
And in headlines from around the military, the Navy has introduced a new rating centered around robotics. As of last week, a sailor can now be called a Robotics Warfare Specialist, or RW, according to the Sea Service. The new rating reflects jobs where sailors oversee robotic and autonomous system operations. In a statement, the Navy said the RW rating is, quote, a major milestone of our Navy's relentless march to achieve a truly hybrid fleet. Those who convert to the Robotics Warfare rating will likely have experience with unmanned vehicles and vessels. Should women wear boat cloaks in the Marines? That's one of the questions the Corps is posing in a new survey about potential uniform changes. The survey asks Marines to weigh in on prospective alterations that would make ribbon racks easier to build and read, replace the all-weather coat with the tanker jacket and the enlisted sea bag, and authorize women to wear the iconic knee-length boat cloak. It's the first time in 5 years Marines have been given the chance to weigh in on potential uniform updates. A Marine spokesperson said almost all the questions on the survey came from issues raised by Marines in the fleet. And here's some fun footage for you. HII, formerly Huntington Ingalls Industries, released images of the next phase of testing of its electromagnetic aircraft launch system, or EMALS. The exercise, called dead load testing, uses a 30-ton wheeled vehicle to simulate the weight of a US warplane. The dead loads were launched off the deck of a retired carrier to mimic their performance on an active warship. The Navy has been looking to replace its traditional steam-powered launch systems for aircraft. The dead load tests provided some fun images, and don't worry, the 80,000-pound cars are recovered from the water when they are done. I am pretty sure they use a big magnet. When we come back, we go to Annapolis to watch Navy boxers show us the sweet science. Don't miss it. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin spoke to Congress this week in a hearing to discuss why he didn't inform the White House in December when he was admitted to Walter Reed Hospital. Austin went into the hospital for treatment of a urinary tract infection related to his recent prostate cancer diagnosis. Daniel Woolfolk has more.
On Thursday morning, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin testified to the House Armed Services Committee on Capitol Hill that his lack of notifying the president about his hospitalization earlier this year didn't affect national security.
I want to be very clear. There was never any lapse in authorities or in command and control. At all times, either I or the Deputy Secretary was in a position to conduct the duties of my office. But we did have a breakdown in notifications during my January stay at Walter Reed, and that is sharing my location and why I was there. And back in December, I should have promptly informed the President, my team in Congress, and the American people of my cancer diagnosis and subsequent treatment. Again, we did not handle this right, and I did not handle it right. As you know, I've apologized, including directly to the President, and I take full responsibility. I'm also taking responsibility for some institutional changes to make sure that this cannot happen again.
Those changes being 8 recommendations to improve the notification process and transfer of authority. Those include full information sharing with the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the creation of written guidelines for better information sharing. The Secretary was diagnosed with cancer in early December, but said he didn't want to burden the President and didn't notify him. The Secretary was rushed by ambulance on New Year's Day to Walter Reed Medical Center for a urinary tract infection where he remained hospitalized. The department transferred authority to Kathleen Hicks, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, but didn't notify the President until January 4th. That's something the committee chairman didn't mince his words about.
It's totally unacceptable that it took 3 days to inform the President of the United States that the Secretary of Defense was in the hospital and not in control of the Pentagon. Wars were raging in Ukraine and Israel. Our ships were under fire in the Red Sea, and our bases were bracing for attack in Syria and Iraq. But the Commander-in-Chief did not know that his Secretary of Defense was out of action. Even the Deputy Secretary, the person to whom your powers were transferred, didn't know that you were in the hospital.
Hicks was in Puerto Rico on vacation, and the unclassified summary of the 30-day review of the matter states that she was positioned to take over. Austin maintained that he was a patient and expected his staff to notify the proper channels, and he said he didn't even have a phone to communicate.
In terms of the hospitalization, January 1st throughout, again, I was the patient. And so my expectation is that the organization informed the right agencies.
Okay, so it wasn't your fault. It was the staff's fault.
Well, I didn't have access to any kind of communications during that time.
You didn't have a phone, nothing?
No.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe we should reform the processes at the hospital to allow phones in there.
The Secretary ultimately took the reins again on January 5th. In the hearing, he said that 2 of the 8 recommendations from the review are now implemented, and the remaining 6 have 30 days from Monday to go into effect.
A lot of people have often wondered, what is it like to get punched in the face by a sailor? We recently went to the Brigade Boxing Championships at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, with that question in mind to get a look at the storied competition. The Brigade Championship is an annual rite of passage for midshipmen/pugilists who fight in a series of bouts in the Academy's arena. We caught up with several of the participants to hear what it was like to take to the canvas and fight under the lights.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Alumni Hall for our 83rd Brigade Boxing Championship.
My name is Kale Shanganuga. I'm from Swarth, Pennsylvania.
I'm Ethan Stern. I'm from Reisterstown, Maryland.
I'm Jake Jones. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I started off high school, I ran track, 100, 200, 400 running, and I was telling myself I'm gonna either run track in college or start fighting.
I originally came to the academy to wrestle, and then after 2 years, I decided it wasn't for me, switched over to boxing, and fell in love with it here.
I've fought with my uncle every Thanksgiving. He was a retired Marine, so every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, it was who wants to learn how to fight.
Yeah, that one sucks. Is get back in. Make sure you try and counter as fast as you can. If he hits you once, you hit him twice.
I may be a little bit crazy, but I don't mind getting punched in the face. It's kind of fun for me, especially when you get to punch the other person back.
Not as bad as you'd think. You got them big poofy gloves, big poofy headgear. Just grit through it.
What's it feel like when you connect out there?
It's actually really satisfying.
There's no better feeling.
One of the most satisfying things in the world. This is truly a brotherhood. Everyone on this team I feel close with. Always supportive. There's never any internal fights. When you fight each other every day, there's really nothing that can come between you.
After graduation, I'll be heading down to Pensacola, Florida to go to flight school to be a naval flight officer.
I got Marine Corps, so I'm gonna go to TBS and then we'll see what happens.
I'm proud to say I'm gonna be a Marine pilot.
I'll take it.
Thank you, sir. Oh, that's awesome. Name and likeness, right? Or image and likeness.
I truly believe that our gym is the deepest in the country. We are absolutely stacked. Our guys that don't even win brigades and medal at nationals. And so every single fighter in this gym is an absolute stud.
When we return, our personal finance expert hits us with her latest advice. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack returns with her latest tips.
According to the Census Bureau, over 70% of American households have credit cards, but debit card users greatly outnumber credit card owners in the U.S. It may be because younger consumers hold misconceptions about credit cards versus debit. It's important to know the difference so you can use one or both to your best financial advantage. Looking at them side by side, both will have the logo of a major credit card company, but the difference is the debit card pulls funds directly from your checking account to fulfill the cost of your purchase immediately. Debit cards may not help you build credit, but they're cheaper to use than credit cards, having fewer fees and no finance charges, and of course, no ensuing debt. While credit cards use funds borrowed from the card issuer to fulfill your purchases, giving you the buying power you need with the flexibility to pay over time. Credit cards do come with finance charges and limitations on how much credit you can use, but they're also a great way to earn rewards or cash back for your purchases, making the most of your money. And of course, credit cards help you build your credit history. There's a need and room in your wallet for both credit and debit. They're excellent financial tools to have at the ready. You just have to be smart and use each of them in ways that are in your best interest always.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, take your finger away from that big red launch button and check out militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the only scout who can see beyond line of sight, sign up for our early bird brief compiled each morning to bring you the most up-to-date headlines. It's also in audio. Check out the podcast version out each weekday. And if social media is where you collect open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, Twitter. And like most junior service members, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. When we return, we take you to SHOT Show 2024 to see some of the most interesting firearms on the show floor. Stick with us. SHOT Show in Las Vegas is a veritable smorgasbord of gear and firearms that takes over the Nevada Conference Center every year. Front and center was Heckler & Koch. The Storied brand has supplied some of the most elite forces in the world, and you do not want that smoke. You might know them best for the MP5 line of submachine guns, and they have a lot more. Daniel Woolfolk went down to the show to get a look at their offerings.
Robbie, you run the defense industry programs at HK, and you got quite the setup here. Give us a little bit of a tour.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Be glad to. Thank you. So we got a few items right here. We'll just start with the top one on the list. So this one's going to the U.S. Army. It's the M110A1 Squad Designated Marksman Rifle in 7.62. We started with the HK417, a G28, and a MR762. And this is kind of a combination of a lot of those different things with some various U.S. Army requirements that we had to meet. They provided a government furnished optic on it, and then we went out and selected a incredible suppressor as well from another U.S. company. So phenomenal system. We delivered quite a number of those. That program's kind of come to an end. Still ongoing to this day is the Marine Corps' M27 Infantry Automatic Rifle, 5.56, fully auto capable. It's been used in a number of roles throughout the Marine Corps and is still in use as time is moving on. And then at the bottom is also a HK416A5 upper receiver kit. So just that upper, the Marine Corps is also using with their M27 IAR for different mission sets.
Okay, so they're taking the upper, they already have the lowers? Or?
Yep, so they're basically taking this upper receiver right here, and they're putting that on top of their M27 lower receiver.
Oh, I see. You got a little bit of a thumper over here, right?
Yep, so we got a little thumper over here. This is the HK's GLM, or Grenade Launcher Module. It's also known within US DoD as the M320. So it's a 40 by 46 millimeter single shot grenade launcher, and it's used across all the services as well.
All right, so that's quite the selection. Is there anything in the works right now?
I'll say there's always something good in the works. You never know what's coming next. We're always looking across the board at different things and different opportunities. We are well known for the quality, so it might take us a little bit longer, but when the product comes out, it's usually absolutely incredible.
All right, so watch this space. Robbie, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.